Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a complicated stack of sources and distill it into the essential, surprising knowledge you need.
And today, our source is, well, it's truly unique. It's not a policy brief or a set of academic articles. It's a discovered manuscript, tentatively dated around 1817 or 1818, and it's titled The Exile of Mrs. Ashworth.
Right, and it reads just like a period novel, the story of a young widow navigating ruin. But the themes are, frankly, revolutionary. So our mission for this deep dive is to trace the path of Dorothea Ashworth as she fights for autonomy in a world that's really designed to constrain her. We're going to track her escape, both geographic and social, her intellectual liberation in the very unexpected field of geology, and then her attempt to build a truly unprecedented relationship.
A relationship completely outside the legal and social structure of marriage.
Exactly.
And to start, you really have to appreciate the depth of her catastrophe. We meet Dorothea Ashworth. She's 34, newly widowed. Her late husband, it's noted, managed to have his entire estate not just diminished, but completely demolished.
That word demolish, that's so key, isn't it? The source is actively establishing her total isolation right from the very first page. She has no safety net.
None. She's now facing what the manuscript calls the twin catastrophes of feminine existence, dependence leading to either pity or charity. The only piece of good fortune is what the text very dryly calls inadvertent providence.
Meaning she has no children?
Precisely. No children to complicate her financial collapse. So all she retains is this small, remote property in Westmorland, Ravenscraft, which only yields about £60 a year, and it comes with an ornamental Gothic tower.
And that useless ornamental tower becomes the symbol for her entire transformation.
It really does.
So what were her actual options? I mean, she's looking at two paths for survival, really. One was to accept this condescending, conditional invitation from her sister, Mrs. Pelham, who clearly just saw Dorothea as a burden.
And the other was to endure the eloquent silence and moral disapproval of her deceased husband's very rigid, unforgiving family. Her lack of financial security meant her London life, her entire identity was it was gone. The house in Bruton Street is let. She has to sell her magnificent library, keeping only the absolute essentials. Shakespeare, Milton, The Spectator, Johnson's Dictionary, and, crucially, 36 novels.
Those novels feel so important, like her only nod to comfort and imagination.
Completely. And her society friend, Lady Carteret, writes to her and calls the move north an exile. But Dorothea, she just flips the script.
Right, she reclaims it.
She does. She tells herself, I shall have the tower. Every Gothic heroine requires one. She's consciously deciding to narrate her own life as this grand romantic escape, even though it's all based on, financial necessity.
And this is where that tower moves from just being this ornamental absurdity to something, well, radical.
Yes. The source reveals in Chapter 4 that the tower was built by a previous Mrs. Ashworth back in 1768. This woman designed it as her philosophical retreat, where she could read radical Enlightenment thinkers like Hume and, significantly, escape the perpetual horizontality of domestic life.
Escape the flat, predictable surface of running a household by climbing up to an isolated vantage point. I just love that metaphor.
It's a physical manifestation of defiance, and Dorothea immediately recognizes a kindred spirit in this architectural choice. She's not just moving into a building, she's inheriting a lineage of intellectual freedom.
It's a space built by a woman before her who also needed autonomy. It absolutely sets the stage for her mission, which is to achieve not just physical space, but intellectual elevation.
Her exile is a choice then, not a punishment.
It's a vertical ascent out of the flatness of acceptable womanhood.
The problem with choosing an isolated Westmoreland life, though, is that the local society is, predictably, limited. Her nearest neighbor is Henry Garrett of Fellbrook.
And we get introduced to Henry through the caretaker's skeptical wife, Mrs. Coates, who kind of dismisses him as a gentleman of independent means and scholarly pursuits, but only in rocks.
Yes. That tiny detail just perfectly encapsulates the local view. He's wealthy enough to be respectable, but his passion is, inherently absurd to them.
And Henry is first glimpsed from Dorothea's tower, of course.
Of course. He's totally absorbed in his fieldwork, hammer in hand, ignoring everything else. He is the ultimate nonconformist, focused only on the ancient, quiet world beneath his feet.
He sounds like a blast at neighborhood gatherings.
Well, the person managing his social incompetence is his sharp, sensible sister, Miss Margaret Garrett. She immediately invites Dorothea to tea to sort of gauge the new widow. And Margaret is wonderfully direct. She characterizes her brother's dedication to the study of the earth as a theological fervor.
And she openly says he finds rocks more comprehensible than people. So, what we have is a man who is socially blunt and intellectually obsessed. He's the total antithesis of the smooth, flattering gentleman she would have met in London drawing rooms.
And when Dorothea finally meets Henry at a dinner with the Pembrokes, this is completely confirmed. He is direct, focused, and clearly not fashioned for drawing rooms.
Yeah.
But he delivers this profound philosophical truth that just stops Dorothea cold. He says, ignorance is easily remedied. Incuriosity is the true tragedy.
And that's the moment, isn't it? The intellectual connection just snaps into place. He's not interested in her status or her past. He's challenging the depth of her mind.
He's speaking directly to the curiosity that led her to buy those 36 novels and climb the tower in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is why his next action is so radical.
He immediately invites her on a geological expedition, promises to show her the country as it actually is, not merely as it appears.
Which is the entire goal of her new life. But wait, for a widow. Accepting an invitation to walk unchaperoned with an unmarried gentleman that was basically throwing away her last shred of respectability, right? What was the social calculation there?
The risk was enormous.
Yeah.
Ms. Garrett is immediately scandalized, protesting, it isn't done. But Dorothea realizes her reputation is already largely ruined by her financial collapse. She accepts the invitation, willing to risk discovering if he is very boring, in which case the risk was pointless, or if she is genuinely interested.
She chooses knowledge over decorum, every time.
Their first lesson at Raven's Crag is the true beginning of her new intellectual life. Henry starts teaching her to read the landscape. He's throwing around these technical terms. Borrowdale volcanic rock, 450 million years old, glacial striations, fault lines.
And the terms themselves aren't just jargon. They represent a fundamental shift in how she sees reality. I mean, Borrowdale volcanic rocks. That's the ancient foundation of the Lake District Mountains.
Exactly. When he points out a fault line, he is showing her a physical fissure where the entire Earth has fractured and shifted. It's immense.
The psychological payoff is immediate. The manuscript says she's forced into a physical focus. She's using her body and her mind to understand an objective reality that has nothing to do with her social standing or her debt.
And that focus, she finds, is profoundly liberating.
Which leads to the central philosophical insight of the manuscript, the comfort of deep time.
Yes. Henry explains that the peaceful hills become records of catastrophe. They look quiet now, but they are built on millions of years of volcanic activity, tectonic collisions, ice ages.
So if human history is one sentence in a book, deep time is the entire library.
Precisely. And Dorothea finds immense comfort in this scale. She realizes that her human concerns, her ruined marriage, her social ostracization, they become trivial when you measure them against the Ordovician period.
Her problems are reduced to, what, the last sentence of the last paragraph of the last page of history? This perspective gives her, like, emotional armor?
It does. But the moment they descend from that elevated time scale, human society comes roaring back. On a long, unchaperoned walk, they run directly into the local chief social arbiter, Sir Thomas Wellesley of Thornfield Park.
Ah, Sir Thomas, the physical embodiment of the limits of society.
He immediately assesses Dorothea's muddy boots and the notebook in her hand, and delivers this chillingly polite warning that it is too easy to let standards slip when one is removed from proper society.
He's basically telling her that her intellectual freedom is a sign of moral decay.
And Henry is genuinely concerned. He immediately worries he's been careless of your reputation.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where you see Dorothea's transformation is complete. She is resolute. She points out that she's a widow of independent means, however small, and she refuses to surrender her intellectual life just to preserve the narrow sensibilities of people she doesn't even respect.
Still, the game has to be played, at least tactically.
Right. And Miss Garrett, despite her personal disapproval, is strategically savvy. She advises Dorothea to attend Lady Wellesley's tea in the Penrith Assembly, a painful performance of respectability, in order to purchase yourself some latitude.
You have to bank enough social capital to afford the eccentricity later.
Exactly. And the tea visit just confirms the cost of her path. Lady Wellesley pointedly warns Dorothea about Henry's reputation for eccentricity and all the mounting gossip. The social pressure to conform is mounting.
So Dorothea endures the Penrith Assembly and finds confirmation that, yeah, geological discussions are vastly superior to assembly room chatter. But the manuscript shows she's having this quiet, revolutionary impact.
She really is. She gets this surprising moment of female solidarity. Miss Wellesley, Sir Thomas's own daughter, approaches her. She expresses open envy and calls Dorothea's chosen life remarkably brave.
So the seeds of autonomy are being planted in the next generation. That's fascinating.
But the intellectual partnership is immediately tested. Henry and Margaret are forced to leave for Edinburgh because their Aunt Hartwell is ill and, well, subsequently dies.
And the separation forces Dorothea to stop just observing and start theorizing. While Henry's away, she dives into the deep theoretical works he left for her, Lyell's Principles of Geology and Hutton's Theory of the Earth.
She realizes her connection with Henry isn't just about physical companionship, it's a mutual intellectual pursuit.
And then the crisis arrives. Margaret writes with this critical news. Henry's been offered a prestigious lectureship with the prospect of a full professorship at the University of Edinburgh.
The epicenter of geological study at the time, a life-changing opportunity, but it would make their shared project geographically impossible.
This is Dorothea's moment of true radical candor. She writes a frank letter back to Miss Garrett. She says clearly that she values Henry's companionship, and she will not ask him to decline Edinburgh. But, crucially, she states she cannot return to conventional marriage.
And she's protecting her most valuable asset, her independence. To understand the gravity of this, you have to remember the legal context of 1818. If she were to marry Henry, she would enter the legal state of coverture.
Which means?
She would legally cease to exist as an independent person. Her property, her small income from Ravenscroft, even her library, all of it would legally become Henry's.
She would be erased.
Right. She's not willing to risk the erasure of your autonomy. So she proposes an irregular, possibly impossible partnership of minds, one that preserved the independence of both parties while still allowing for companionship. She's demanding a new social contract that the 19th century just hasn't written yet.
Henry's response is marvelous. It's written in the language of his discipline. He replies that he had already declined Edinburgh, preferring to be free to do geology, not to professionalize it.
And he accepts her terms, framing their future in scientific metaphors.
That framing completely removes the conventional romance, doesn't it? By calling it a test, he's giving her intellectual agency in the relationship, something marriage could never do.
Absolutely. He agrees they need conformable sequences, periods of aligned activity, time together, and deliberate gaps time apart to maintain their individual work. He says he fears marriage as ownership. His ultimate proposal is that they simply are, together but separate, a partnership that exists outside legal recognition.
He's willing to risk the social censure being called her mistress and damaging his professional standing for this.
He calls the whole arrangement an empirical test of an untried hypothesis.
They're turning their relationship into a shared intellectual experiment, prioritizing compatibility and independence over romantic or legal convention. It's astounding.
So upon Henry's return in March, they meet to formalize the terms. Miss Garrett provides what the manuscript calls sufficiently distant chaperonage. They agree to the grand experiment: separate households, a partnership of equals, and accepting the inevitable social consequences.
And the social hammer falls immediately. Lady Wellesley quietly withdraws all invitations. Others just cut off contact. They are ostracized, just as they feared, but just as they prepared for.
This ostracism really proves the depth of the challenge they posed. They didn't just break a rule, they suggested the rules themselves were irrelevant.
But that's balanced by intellectual and social validation. The Pembrokes remain supportive, and Dr. Pembroke has the perfect summary, calling the censure the predictable response of limited minds to unlimited thinking.
And the quiet revolution continues. Miss Wellesley, inspired by Dorothea's choice, decides to refuse an undesirable marriage match herself. Dorothea's experiment is actually generating real-world data.
The ultimate validation, though, comes in print. Henry and Dorothea collaborate on a technical paper about glacial striations around Ravenscroft.
It's immediately rejected by the Geological Society. Why? Predictably, their charter didn't recognize female authorship even if the research was solid. The barrier for women in professional science was literal and institutional.
But they pivot, submitting it to a more progressive Edinburgh journal where it's accepted and published. And this isn't just a nice footnote. It validates her role as a genuine researcher, a professional colleague.
Her intellectual contribution is now a documented fact, independent of her relationship status.
As the relationship progresses, it's guided by the same principles of honesty. Dorothea eventually raises the question of physical intimacy, stating she wants it as a choice rather than something I must endure.
She's insisting on consent and equality in all dimensions of the partnership, renegotiating the power dynamic of physical relationships itself.
Moving it from a wifely duty to a negotiated term of partnership.
And Henry agrees to approach this new dimension with the same honesty, framing it as the scientific approach to romance. The whole manuscript underscores that they negotiated every part of their union as colleagues first, before they ever negotiated it as lovers.
And it concludes with Dorothea in her tower, finding that her new reality is one of constant change over time, just like the geology they study. She has escaped the somnambulism of her former life. She is merely awake.
When we look back at the source, the cost and the reward of the exile of Mrs. Ashworth are just astonishingly clear. Dorothea chose intellectual life and true autonomy, retaining her property rights, her agency over social acceptance and coverture.
She and Henry didn't just fall in love. They consciously constructed a partnership model, colleagues, companions, equals for which 19th century society had zero template. They used the rigor of science to define their terms.
And the profound questions raised by this text, even if we never fully verify the author, are exactly why this story resonates today. The truth of the authorship is less important than the questions it asks.
If they could successfully negotiate an empirical test of an untried hypothesis for a fully autonomous equal partnership in 1818 Westmorland, what does that tell you about the limits of our own relational architecture today? What conventional boundaries are we simply accepting out of curiosity?
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Indeed. We'll talk to you next time.